Let's dive right in, shall we? You know, we hear the word toxic tossed around the break room all the time when people complain about bad bosses. But today, we're going way beyond that superficial label. Welcome to This Explainer, where we take complex, cutting-edge research and break it down so you can see exactly what's happening behind closed doors. We're going to explore the deep, psychoanalytic mechanics of narcissistic leadership. We'll be drawing heavily on Sara Shadabi's brilliant analysis of the subject to uncover what's literally rewiring the brains of teams in boardrooms and organizations everywhere. To really wrap our heads around this, there's one central anchoring question I want you to keep in mind for this entire explainer. Just one question. Does this leader create independent thinkers or dependent followers? It completely flips the script on how we measure a leader's true impact, right? Because we usually judge leaders by their charisma, their power, or the bottom line. But psychoanalysis says, hold on, let's look at what they actually produce in the minds of the people around them.
Now here's the wild part. Narcissistic leadership rarely starts out feeling toxic. Actually, it's usually incredibly inspiring. We call this the seductive beginning. It's packed with supreme confidence, bold language, and these massive promises of transformation. These leaders project this aura that makes you feel like, wow, we are part of something historic. You don't feel like you're just clocking into a job. You feel like you're on a vital rescue mission. It's a completely deceptive, but highly magnetic, charismatic pull.
But then, the shift happens. Sara Shadabi highlights this crucial concept rooted in Freud's theory of libidinal withdrawal. Over time, the leader essentially becomes the central psychological object of the entire group. What does that mean? It means the organization literally stops being organized around actual work, or truth, or growth. Instead, all of the team's energy gets redirected into protecting the leader's fragile, inflated self-image. The leader stops seeing people as independent humans and starts treating them as mere extensions of themselves. You just become a mirror, and your only job is to reflect their greatness right back at them.
Which brings us to the absolute tragedy of this whole dynamic. Listen to this, because it hits hard. A narcissistic leader doesn't build a team, they build an audience. This is the core metaphor of Shadabi's analysis, and it is absolutely brilliant. In this kind of environment, you aren't valued for your specific skills, or your problem solving, or your independent thought. Nope. You're only valued as long as you act as an admiring spectator. Think about it. A team collaborates to solve hard problems. An audience? An audience just watches, applauds, and validates the star on stage.
So what does this actually do to the collective brain of the company? Well, it causes the literal destruction of thinking. In a healthy workplace, the driving question in any meeting is, what is true? People are working together to find reality. But in a narcissistic structure, that mindset completely collapses into pure survival mode. The only question people start asking themselves is, wait, is it safe to say this? Employees totally stop evaluating reality, and they just start calculating the danger of speaking up.
And why do they feel that danger? Because of the total collapse of psychological safety. Look, in a normal environment, criticism is just data, right? It's just information you use to iterate and get better. But to a narcissistic leader, criticism isn't data. It's a narcissistic injury. It feels like a deeply personal attack. So suddenly, criticism equals betrayal. And when independent thought gets treated as treason, guess what? People just stop sharing it.
And psychologically, it goes even deeper. If we look at the psychoanalytic framework of Valls, we see how the leader effectively hijacks the team's moral compass. They occupy this space known as the ego ideal. Basically, the leader completely replaces the group's professional standards, so the team stops striving for excellence and they just start striving purely for the boss's approval. Independent, critical thought gets entirely swapped out for blind obedience.
This leads straight into what we call the superego shift. The organizational superego, you know, that internal voice of ethics and rules, turns incredibly toxic. Professional responsibility just vanishes. Instead, it gets replaced by sadistic control, fueled by shame, guilt, and fear. Employees aren't waking up anxious about dropping the ball on a project or failing a client. They're waking up absolutely terrified of accidentally upsetting the leader. Loyalty completely devours ethics.
So how on earth do people survive in a pressure cooker like this? Well, the human mind is remarkably adaptable, even to toxic environments. The research outlines 5 distinct psychoanalytic defensive mechanisms that basically infect the whole organization as the team tries to cope. Let's walk through these 5 behaviors one by one. Once you understand them, I guarantee you're going to recognize them everywhere.
Number 1 is idealization. To cope with the psychological violence being thrown at them, the team just rationalizes it. They tell themselves, oh, he's just harsh because he's a genius, or she degrades us because her standards are just on another level. It's a trick of the mind. This mechanism tricks the team into misinterpreting outright abuse as a sign of greatness, which makes the intolerable feel, well, acceptable.
Next up is projection. Drawing on Cameron's psychoanalytic theory, this is where the leader, and eventually the entire system, point-blank refuses to accept that any problem could possibly originate at the center of power. So all failures, anxieties, and weaknesses are projected outward. They are always scapegoated onto somebody else. It's always a weak employee, a jealous competitor, or a team that just isn't a culture fit. The center is never, ever at fault.
The third mechanism is honestly the most heartbreaking: identification with the aggressor. To avoid becoming the target, some team members subconsciously decide to just adopt the traits of the abuser. They morph into smaller versions of the narcissistic leader. They start using the exact same degrading language, the same contempt, and the same need for rigid control over their own direct reports. The toxicity literally cascades right down the org chart.
Then we hit splitting. In a narcissistic system, human complexity is just destroyed. You're forced into one of two extreme black and white buckets. Either you are entirely loyal and therefore a brilliant superstar, or you are a hidden enemy and entirely worthless. There is no middle ground. There is no room for nuance and absolutely zero room for a fiercely loyal employee who just happens to disagree on a strategy.
And finally, defensive silence. Now, this isn't just someone being a little shy in a meeting. This is severe cognitive dissonance. Employees are forced to separate their thought from their speech. On the inside, they know something is deeply, deeply wrong. But on the outside, they stay perfectly quiet just to survive the sheer psychological exhaustion of it all. Ultimately, your best, most capable employees are either totally silenced by this exhaustion, or they just pack up and leave the organization entirely.
As we bring this explainer home, it all comes down to the ultimate leadership test. A healthy leader creates thinkers. A narcissistic leader creates followers. It's that simple. A healthy leader expands the capacity of the people around them. A narcissistic leader confiscates it.
And honestly, it goes even deeper than that. A healthy leader helps the team see reality, no matter how brutal or difficult that reality might be to face. A narcissistic leader fundamentally warps truth. They force reality to bend and shift and distort into whatever weird shape is necessary to protect their fragile self-image.
So here's the bottom line. We've got to stop measuring leaders simply by their initial charisma or those grand, sweeping promises they make on day one. We have to look at what happens to the minds of the people working under them. I want to leave you with this provocative question to evaluate your own environments. Is your capacity to think growing, or is it being confiscated? Are you part of a thinking team, or have you just been cast in an audience? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those hard questions.